Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's webinar from Executech on cybersecurity guidelines from Washington State. We have James Wright with us today. We'll just give everybody a couple of minutes or a couple seconds here to log in and join us, just joining the room. If you're just joining us again, this is the webinar on the cybersecurity guidelines for Washington State. We're excited to share some of this very useful and relevant information with you today. We'll give everyone just a few more seconds to get settled in and join us. Just a few quick housekeeping items. My name is Gary. I will be in the chat. If you need any help, please feel free to reach out and let us know. This webinar is being recorded, and we will have the recording available after the fact on our website, so you are free to rewatch it and, of course, share with colleagues or those that you think would find it useful. I think we are ready to get started. I'll go ahead and introduce James. James Wright is our presenter today. Many of you know James personally. He has worked with many organizations in Washington, including with CEA and Washington Vocational and WISE and many others. He's worked in IT for over 10 years. He is a pro at what he does, and he now is the Director of Professional Services. We are excited to have him. He has done his homework on this sort of seemingly intimidating guidelines and process, but James is here to make it easy for us. So thank you, James, and take it away.
Awesome. Once again, welcome everybody. Hopefully I can make this as simple and easy for you guys as I can. Obviously, when we start talking about things like this, the word cybersecurity in some people's minds can actually create a level of fear and uncertainty of what do they want from me. So let's get started. I've got a lot of information I'd like to go over. There's a lot of information that the state has published, and through various contracts, you may see various guidelines that will mirror this. And so we want to make sure that, once again, that you guys are familiar with it and know what to expect. Just a little bit about me. Once again, I've been with Executech since 2014. I am one of the directors of technical operations here, in charge of our professional service division. I currently sit on the boards to two colleges here in Utah, where I work with them to make sure their educational platforms mirror what happened in society around their cybersecurity program. And as he shared with you, I've had a lot of work of practical management and compliance for cities, DoD, medical, banking industries. And I always like to throw in a fun fact that always makes people shocked. But yes, I was a 12-pound, 11-ounce baby. So cybersecurity. Why is cybersecurity an important topic for us to talk about? Well, as the slide shows, cybersecurity is important because it encompasses a lot of the sensitive data that pertains to us as individuals, intellectual property of what makes our businesses unique. Data that's being shared between government and county, government and city. And our goal is to make sure that that information is always kept secure so that theft or folks that would be perpetrators of that data can't use that against us or in a way that would create a problem. So it's important for us to consider this topic. And the reality is that whether we're talking about individuals, small businesses, or large multinational businesses, with the increase in usage of what are known as the Internet of Things, or smartphones and tablets, and you think about Nest with home cameras, the ability to control your washers, your dryers, your refrigerators, we have to be a little bit more cognizant of the things that are going on in society. These cybersecurity threats that exist now are not ones that have existed in the past, and we need to understand the difference between cybersecurity and information security. Although, as it shows, the skill sets are coming more and more similar, it is a very important item for us to maintain. Governments around the world are bringing more attention to cyber crimes. GDPR, which is the EU standard, is an example of that. It has increased what they have to do as individual businesses in their region. And it is important for us to take that look here in the United States a little bit further on that topic as well. So what is the impact of cybercrime, right? When you take a look at businesses, you know, if they don't have a lot of time or they don't focus some time on it, what could be the side effects of not taking cybersecurity and making it a priority? Well, the first one there lists economic costs, theft of intellectual property, corporate information, disruption in trading, the cost of repairing damaged systems. If you look at that in itself, there could be a large dollar figure attached to a cyber attack or a cyber breach. Reputational cost, understanding that maybe that the data is no longer secure with that company can create doubt in folks, and maybe they will no longer want to do business with you. And then like GDPR and other data breach laws like HIPAA and PCI, there might actually be a regulatory fine, sanctions that were generated because of folks not taking the time to properly secure their networks. So regardless of the situation, as a society, it is important for us to draw a little bit more attention to these things. And we want to be aware and mindful of what our obligations are. A couple examples of some data breaches to consider. Here's one for eBay. Between February and March 2014, eBay was the victim of a breach of encrypted passwords, and they had to publicly ask over 145 million users to reset their passwords. And at the same time, explain, you know, why this happened, how this happened, and what information that was private to them that was actually taken and distributed on what is called the dark web. Another example here for us to take a look at is Equifax. Equifax cybercrime identity theft event affected approximately 145.5 million US consumers. But then there was a larger broad range there in Britain and Canada, it causing their stocks to lose some value and regulatory fines from the FTC. As you can see, those are not small dollar amounts. The average business probably wouldn't be able to, without the proper cybersecurity insurance policy, be able to have a fine like that from a regulatory compliance standpoint and still be able to manage for themselves on a financial level. So why are cybersecurity laws changing? Well, let's talk about get more specific about the why around Washington. This is kind of an interesting statistic, but Washington is number 10. Over the period of 2018-2019, Washington had 254.1 victims per 100,000 in the population in the state, where they were victims of data theft of one form or another. And then with the losses due to business email compromise, that would be phishing and other attempts through the email portal of our businesses, nationally over $676 million were actually having to be paid out to protect themselves from that. Now, with the complete list on the FBI site, you can look there and see all of the potential crimes that have been reported, if that is of something of interest to you. So obviously, with Washington making the top list of being targeted, if you'd like to look at it that way, the state of Washington now has wanted to take a little bit closer look at it. Now, one of the bills that's currently up being worked on right now, and I believe it's stalled in March, would be one that would be a little bit more intensive than what we're going to talk about today, but it is definitely something we want to be mindful of because of the fact that these items that we're going to discuss today might actually get a little bit more tighter. They might get a little more stringent. So the Washington State Privacy Act is going to be something that, if they put it together, will be one of the most significant ways for them to protect them, but it's going to be the most comprehensive privacy law in the U.S. today, where the U.S. government has yet to create our own standard like GDPR. That CCPA, if you're not familiar with that, that is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which was passed last year. So this new Washington State Privacy Act would take components of GDPR, CCPA, put them together. And as you can see, one of your local senators has stated, it has never been more important for the state government to take bold and meaningful action in the arena of consumer data, and that's what this legislation does. So it's important then for us to ask some meaningful questions. What does this mean for businesses in Washington who have been asked to follow these rules? That could be someone who is through a specific contract receiving state funds. It could be directly integrating with the state and having those, those data sets that need to be protected. But we have to ask that question, that if we are in this place and we are being asked, what does that mean for us, right? Well, that just means we have a lot of work to do to make sure we are in compliance with those requirements. And please know, and I want to make sure we talk about this right now, is in some of our industries that we're seeing across Washington, there are different set of compliance guidelines that we have to follow. Folks may be CARF, could be HIPAA, it could be PCI, it could be ISO 27001, it could be FedRAMP, it could be FERPA, it could be NIST, red flag. When we talk about compliance, what we have to do is look at it as we have to protect ourselves, where whatever we're trying to protect, that we're taking the highest standard from all of the compliance standards that we have. And we need to obviously make sure that we follow the most stricter guideline in those set of regulations. That way we basically satisfy every guideline that we are being asked to follow. So at the end of the day, this is going to require a little bit of a change in our mindset to break to even the odds with these perpetrators, these bad actors, these cyber criminals. At the end of the day, we need to first recognize that cybersecurity is not just a technical problem. It's not just, oh, well, I have this solution in place. We have to understand that it is actually okay to collaborate with others in our industry and find out how they are mitigating the same exact risk. Being willing to share what solutions we have, being open-minded to change solutions to protect ourselves. And then at the same time, we need to focus on making our own personal castles, our own businesses, get that castle stronger, a moat deeper, and we need to do that through education and training about cybersecurity and understanding how they can recognize phishing and these other items that could potentially be in there. Only with the right mindset and a holistic strategy in place can we start to build the right tools, enable effective policies, and establish the needed collaboration to tackle our cybersecurity challenges over the long term. Now, I put this in here for a little bit of humor. Hopefully everybody else sees it the same way. I'd like you to meet Shrek. He was the first cybersecurity expert. And he once said, I believe, cybersecurity is like an onion. It has layers. Make the hacker peel it back one layer at a time. So at the end of the day, Shrek is right. For cybersecurity, everything that we do needs to be done in a fashion that is layered. And we have to look at it that there's not one solution that is going to protect us for everything. And that as perpetrations and acts occur by these cyber criminals change, we may also have to change our solutions in place. All right, so it's time to create a layered cybersecurity approach to managing our information systems that align with WATEC's cybersecurity roles. Well, the next question is going to be very easy. It's like, well, how do I do that in my business? How is it that I do it where my business might be different from somebody else's business? And it's kind of an easy answer. At the same time, it's a complex answer. Here's why. Because it really depends on the type of data classification that we fall into in the guidelines that the state has issued. And obviously in that circle, it talks about the different levels of public data, sensitive data, confidential data, or that data that is considered special handling. If we have any layers of those, each one of them is actually going to dictate our approach. We may have to have different criteria in place or solutions in place to help manage, or processes and policies in place to help manage each of those different types of data sets that we are gathering based upon the state's requirements here. Now, Internet of Things, disclaimer, first things first. So one of the things that we want to make sure of that we talk about right out of the gate is an understanding that pretty much all of the major compliance standards, including the state of Washington, is requiring one thing. That if a hardware device or a software solution that we are currently using is no longer supported by the manufacturer, which means that they're receiving ongoing security updates and patching, then we should no longer use it. That's a very important fact, because what it does is it creates an item that we have to have a conversation internally at that point to discuss how we manage our budgets to meet that requirement, right? It's a little bit of a challenge for some businesses, and we recognize that. But at the end of the day, if we follow certain practices, we can actually set ourselves up for that. So this means first things we need to do under this new Washington guideline, the cybersecurity rule, is to create a hardware software replacement policy that will dictate basically the rate in which we replace our hardware and how often we upgrade our server platforms and our desktop platforms or whatever application we may be using. If you look at the standards like ITIL, which initially started over in Europe, that has now been adopted by a lot of companies here in the United States, minimum standards there are, 20% or basically every 5 years rolling a piece of that hardware out and software packages out so that they can always stay in a position where they are never looking at a catastrophic failure or something that has been end-of-lifed, that then they have to come out of pocket for a large chunk of cash. By doing this, obviously it prepares ourselves in our budgets and allows us to budget for those changes and prepare for those financially. Let's get a little bit deeper now into these requirements. And this is kind of the real meat and potatoes of the requirement that they're putting in front of us from the state of Washington. And at the same time, there are still a lot more layers to it than this. And with the amount of time that we actually have, I wanted to make sure we went through the top categories and what those mean. So first and foremost, state of Washington is asking for us to make sure everybody has a network firewall that is licensed and active with the manufacturer. Once again, making sure that they have security patching, firmware updates, and things that are coming out. As you can see, I put some technical line items from one of the audit documents that was sent out to one of our clients. So you can see these are actively things in which they are pursuing and checking for. But these next gen firewalls are looking for things like intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. They do gateway blocking of malware, spyware. They do some GeoIP blocking and technology, things like that. The state is really interested that we have those in place because then we start from the outside working in, and we have the ability at that point in time to start having one layer of security that a potential bad actor or perpetrator would have to go through. And understanding that if a firewall offers some sort of a malware or spyware solution, this does not negate the need for an antivirus, anti-spyware, or anti-ransomware solution on our deeper into our networks. The next thing we need to look at is making sure that we have some sort of a policy or procedure in and around the support of hardware and software to make sure those security patches are actually occurring. And we need to actually have this in writing so we know who is doing it, what is being done, when it's being done, and how it is that we are rolling out these more sensitive patches and the ones that we considered 0-day patches, which is new challenges that haven't been seen before. And then obviously at the same time, if we have a policy that says restricting access from devices that do not conform to patch management, what that policy looks like. So in our organizations, if we do not have this policy in place, it's been asked by the state for us to create it, understand how, when, and where all of our devices are being done. So if you think about it, your firewall, your servers, your workstations, your wireless, anything that would be connected to the internet. One of the next main points they are asking for us to make sure of is that there are system vulnerability checks being performed. This can be done by a variety of on-site tools, but at the same time, they want to make sure that there is a policy in place to help us identify new security vulnerabilities in our internal systems. And we can do that by simply working, if we wanted to, with a third party that provides those third-party vulnerability scans. They want us to at least do that at least one time a year. So we have some logistical information to work off of as an IT group inside your business to make sure that we are preventing those vulnerabilities from existing and at least have a plan of action in place so that we can mitigate those challenges. Now, this next one is going to be one that's going to be very important. And the reason why is because this is going to require probably some of the most adjustment by folks And I know that from working with different companies and clients that we have at Executech, this is probably one of the biggest things that folks are having to adjust, is in and around the concept of identity management. You know, is the person logging into the system who they say they are? And can you tell me by your policy and procedures that that is who it is? And so you can see here, there are 4 main categories that are being identified that we need to look at in and around identity management. So anyone who accesses the data or the systems that are under the jurisdiction of the state's requirements, we must be able to make sure that if John Smith is the employee that is accessing file number X, that one, it pertains to his job and that he is who he says he is. So with that being said, everybody has to have their own unique user ID that is, you know, identifiable by who they are as an individual person. They are asking for us to look at 2-factor or multi-factor authentication to be used for accessing systems, which can be in and around tools like biometric scanners, fingerprint scanners. It could be the use of these key card, smart card items where you have a little slot and you slide it in. It could be, you know, a 5-digit PIN. To give you an example, you know, we use different type of multi-factor authentication here at Executech. And basically, as you can see, I have a series of, I call them launch codes, but they change every, you know, 20 seconds or so. And if I don't have the correct launch code for that multi-factor, I can't log in as James Wright. So these are some of the things in which the state's asked. Password policy, they've actually changed it a little bit. And in this application, what I did is I kind of combined a whole bunch of different standards and created one that could be considered kind of relatively best practice, right? The days of, you know, 6 months having the same password is too long. Some folks are saying 30, 60, 90 days is too short. The sweet spot's about every 120 days. The biggest thing they're looking at is making our requirement of our passwords to be longer. So the state's asking us to no longer follow 6 or 7, but 8 characters as a minimum. Make sure those are unique. And we want to make sure that those do not repeat themselves for the previous 5 passwords. The goal there is in that complexity, they're wanting to make sure someone doesn't do summer 1, summer 2, summer 3, or spring 2020, summer 2020. They want us to make sure those type of unique passwords or those ununique passwords are being used. We want to make sure they're always unique, that they're at least 8 characters, and something that is not easily found in the dark web, where millions of passwords that have been hacked or stored, and these perpetrators will use those to try to infiltrate a particular system. And then the other thing they're asking for us is to set up in our networks auto screen locking, so that when a workstation that has access to this sensitive data, if you walk away from it, the computer tells itself to automatically relock and require credentials to log back in. 10 minutes is about the sweet spot. Higher trafficked areas, like under HIPAA, they want it to be 2 minutes. But auto locking is one of those things that we want to address in this area too, just to make sure of that. Now, the state's asking us to go a little more in depth for what's called change management or change auditing. In addition to our unique IDs, ensure only authorized users are accessing controlled data. They want us to have systems or tools that will report unauthorized or unintentional modifications of data or possible misuse of data, and have the ability to track if somebody has recently been granted admin rights that, I actually typed that wrong, but shouldn't have, right? So the reality there is the person accessing this data, are they who they are, but now it's, do they have the rights to be there? Should they be there? Are they taking this data, using it for a purpose that is not appropriate according to the standard? You know, they want us to have these systems in place that are actively, in the word, sniffing the network or watching as users log into file shares to make sure they're only accessing files that are appropriate to them, as well as having a policy in and around the concept of auditing or having self-audits to make sure somebody wasn't accidentally granted rights to a set of files or controlled data sets that they weren't supposed to be controlled over. Now, that data in itself, we need to talk about another requirement they've asked us to follow, and that is in and around the concept of data encryption. Data encryption is, tools like BitLocker. There's other tools out there that can be used that basically make sure that if I walk away with a computer and I pull that hard drive, that somebody can't just dock that hard drive to a utility tool and pull the data off of it, right? So what it's asking for us to do is make sure that any data that falls into this category in these sensitive territories, that it is encrypted at rest, meaning sitting on the hard drive, or in motion, which means we're transferring it between that hard drive to another user or to another body through email or something of that nature. They would like us to make sure that any data that's being accessed remotely through tools like VPNs, that's done with an AES 128 encryption level as a minimum standard. And that's a little bit higher than what most companies will follow. Hopefully most companies are at least following that now, but we can't say that they are for sure. But they definitely do not want, unless it's a very controlled environment, for us to use remote desktop as a way to access it, unless it's using something that is multi-factored over something like a radius server, not to get too technical. But for any of those that are in the environment today that potentially are technical minds, that is something for us to look at. The use of thumb drives and external hard drives, there's a lot of questions and concerns around this. And the answer is, can they be used? The answer is yes. There are a lot of guidelines around that. In the world of HIPAA, they tell you that if you're going to use it, it has to be encrypted while it's in motion. But then you also have to reformat it, redo a few other things to it, and actually write it all down before you can actually use it a second time. And that we should never commingle the sensitive data between the individuals. So the reality there is, if we are in an environment where we want to allow for thumb drives or external hard drives to be used, we need to take a look at that a little closer. Are we encrypting those so that somebody, once again, cannot just access that data that shouldn't have access to it? All server disk and hard drives of computer systems need to be encrypted. And then once again, when we are sending data over email, encrypted email platform is required. And what's different from that versus secure email, for everybody to understand, is you can have a secure server like on Microsoft 365, but to get that to be encrypted, what happens is the user actually logs into the server and reads the email, and the sender logs into the server when they send the email. But folks, that email never even traverses the internet at that point. It stays stagnant in an encrypted environment that is secure, and so that never actually travels, thus giving you the encryption that you need and the protection of the data that's inside of that email. Moving on to another requirement, and like I said, there's quite a few of these still, is in and around the concept of email security. Phishing is one of those big items for us to look at. And so they are wanting to make sure that we have a spam filter in place to reduce the likelihood of a bad actor happening. I mean, these modern day spam filters are great. Some of them are signature based, but the newer AI based spam filters are looking for a lot of different components. And as they layer up the risk and the verbiage, they may flag it. They may block it because it's coming from a known server. You can have it checked that the originator is who they say they are. There's all these great features that can reduce our risk. In the state of Washington has absolutely asked us to take a look at that again and make sure that we're in a place that we can be compliant. The next category is going to be around the concept of the wireless network. They are asking for us to be very smart when we set up wireless access. Wireless access does include the ability to wirelessly print to printers that can be bridged, and eventually someone can use those printers to break into your network, but that we have a minimum standard of WPA2 or WPA2 enterprise with these passphrases on all of our wireless networks to be secure. They recommend that we create 3 separate networks, one for the IT to administer to the hardware, one for staff that limits them to what they need to have access to, and then the one for a guest, as we have parties that come and join us at our facilities to do work with us and support us, that they have the ability to get to the internet for their devices, but at the same time, keep them segregated from the equipment that we have and whatever data we may have. Back to that topic about antivirus. Antivirus, anti-spyware, anti-ransomware protection. They want to make sure that we have the ability to protect against all of those in our systems. They want to see that we have the ability to detect, prevent, and then also recover these controls from those malicious codes. So with that said, we need to take a look at our solutions that we're using. Not every antivirus, anti-spyware solution, or anti-malware, to add in their solution out there, it truly protects against anti-ransomware. It may actually only acknowledge that it exists, but it doesn't actually help you remediate it through the natural solution that it was created or designed to be by the manufacturer. The next area that we need to talk about as a category of review in our networks is going to be in and around the concept of mobile device management. Mobile devices include our laptops, smartphones, PDAs, and all of these other portable devices that we've been talking about. They want to make sure that if we have these devices are being connecting to or using this data, that we, one, have the ability to lock a user out of it, that we have the ability to remote wipe it, and we need to ensure that the data is encrypted in motion. And once again, these are the industry standards algorithms that are being asked to follow are all validated by a group called NIST, which helps us understand this AES 128, and 256, and all those other little technical terms that we see. But we want to make sure that we follow that with our mobile device management, which there are tools out there that allow us to provide the reporting, the policies, and as well as the management of our devices while they're out being worked on in the field beyond our Active Directory environments that are currently being used, or something like a Jamf Jump Cloud environment as well. The next area that we need to talk about is disaster recovery and a disaster recovery policy. The state really wants to make sure that if you are controlling an area of sensitive data that is proprietary but may be important in the event of your business or your entity being offline, let's say you had a physical server on premise and it crashed. The state of Washington wants to make sure we have a disaster recovery about how we're going to get to that data. If the data was lost, if it was compromised, can we get it spun up somewhere in another server at another facility? Can we get it spun up in the cloud? Do we have a way to acknowledge that if there was a piece of data, right? Very important in the HIPAA world, and I think that's one of the reasons why the state is grabbing that in, because they know that a lot of these data sets can cross over into the society and with folks that have special needs. And some of that data, they may need to know the history of the individual to know how to help them in crisis now. But if they can't get to it, they want to make sure there's a way to recover from it. So when you think about that at a larger scale in some of these other environments, we want to make sure we have the ability to get to that and we can recover from those environments. Now, this is another one to talk about because I think this is something that's going to be new for some. Logging and incident response is a requirement of this policy, and when you look at that, they want to know that you know what to do in those situations. My environment has ransomware. We had a building fire and my network infrastructure has been destroyed. What are we doing there? How are we going to respond? How are we logging down with folks what we are actually doing, how we did it, who's to do it, who's to be notified? And beyond that disaster recovery policy, they're wanting to make sure we have individual logs in and around different things. How we provide our training to our staff about security breaches and how to respond. So for the most part, if you look at that slide, anything that we have there that will create a continuity plan of our business, we want to log those events. We want to log the activities of our staff. Now, the next slide I'm going to share is kind of an interesting one because this was actually in one of the contracts that one of our clients received, and it's actually something that is mentioned inside of our contracts from the state of Washington. If any of us here on the call outsource our IT to a company that is not ourselves, right? Because obviously if you're ourselves, you already know the answer to this. But if you outsource your IT service to a third-party company, they have to be able to provide the ability to show you that they can provide this set of security standards for the data that's in their care and control, like your passwords, like how they access your network, Or what is requested is that you submit to whomever your contract is with that provider for approval. So the Washington standard for that is the 141.10. If they can't protect the data as articulated within the contract, which obviously the Washington cybersecurity rules in play, then the contractor must be submitted to the contact specified for the contract for review and approval. You actually have to get the state's approval that they can function on behalf of you in this state. So for the most part, that brings us to the conclusion of a lot of the very high level categories. And then obviously we want to remind you that Executech is here to help. And we are very much here to help answer any questions that you may have. We have staff in the various regions, and we're supporting the Pacific Northwest. Physical offices in Portland, Seattle, and Spokane. So I bring up Portland because we can get into Vancouver. We have folks that are willing to go to any of the regions in that area. We are here to help provide any type of a WATEC readiness assessment to help navigate your network and provide you some feedback based upon our experience and knowledge. And if you want to reach out to us at any point after this, we are offering a free dark web scan for your domain. So like at executech.com, we have tools that can go out there and find out if you are already compromised, you have compromised users or passwords that are actively being used that are currently for sale on the dark web, that area of the internet that not a lot of people know about. So feel free to reach out for us, and I'm hoping this was informative for you. Now, there's a lot that we just went over. There's a lot of concepts, a lot more than we can, cover in the 30, 35 minutes we've been on this call, but we are here to help, and thanks for joining. Back to you, Gary.
James, that was awesome. If there's any questions that any of you have right now, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can address them right now. I see, Wayne, that you had a question about how we're addressing it with clients. James, I don't know if you want to touch on that just quickly, how we at Executech are going to be hitting some of these guidelines for our clients. We, of course, can address that to your specific situation.
Yes, so for our clients there in the state of Washington, one, we've identified a group that are going to be affected by this new cybersecurity guideline, and most of those we're already actively working with them on plans, because 9 out of 10 of those have already received their request for self-audit and the self-questionnaires. But we are going to be actively, through our QA team, making sure that those things are in place and create roadmaps for our clients to actually get to be where they need to be. At the end of the day, to be blunt and honest, an individual company can go broke chasing compliance. So the goal is that we have at least acknowledged the deficiency, created that roadmap, and have an explanation of how we're going to facilitate that within a lot of our clients that we have up there that are nonprofits. And if they don't do certain services, they don't receive income. So they don't just have money laying around. And it's working within those budgets and working in those environments and with those contracts and those that you're working with at the state, county, and city levels to facilitate making sure these needs are met.
Great. Thank you, James. It doesn't look like there's been any other questions, so we'll wrap it up. Again, there will be a recording of this webinar available, and you're free to share it out. And thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of your week.